January 1st, or as I like to refer to it, Dr. John Henrik Clarke Day. For those of you who don't know, this is the date that our Grand Master Teacher, and in my opinion, because everybody's got their own particular Grand Master Teacher that they venerate the most, but for me, Dr. Clarke holds a very special place in my heart and mind. That grand old man who opened the eyes of so many and told it exactly like it is. So I like to think of this as being something of the 2020 Dr. John Henrik Clarke Memorial Address. White supremacy makes it a point for their institutions to give annual memorials to their little heroes, actually the villains of history. Well, we need to make it a point that we perpetually and regularly remind people of who the true heroes are. Our heroes. Dr. John Henrik Clarke was a brilliant man. A man of integrity, a man of dedication, a man of honor, a man of intellectual rigor. And he was willing to weigh all sides of a particular issue in his search for truth. As a young man, like a lot of black people had in the early 20th century, he briefly dabbled in socialism, but he didn't stay there long because it didn't take him very long to figure out that these white socialists were no different than the rest of the other white supremacists who they claimed to be different from. Oh, they talked something of a good game, but as we've seen with so much of the white left, it was just rhetoric. Just their branding, that's all. Dr. Clarke would spend the rest of his life, though, preaching the gospel of PanAfricanism. And while in the abstract, that is certainly something whose time will come, we have to deal with where we are now. And where we are now is just the simple truth. Outside of those of us who came out of slavery in this country, that Pan-African ideal is something that most black folks around the world outside the United States are not receptive to. We're receptive to it here in the U.S. because we didn't have those tribalistic lines drawn. We were told that all of y'all, doesn't matter where you're from, this is where you're at. That gave us clarity. But with the other groups of black people around the world, well, you got the black folks who are trying to say that their tribe is better than this tribe over there. And if you go to the Caribbean, you got a bunch of, in some cases, wannabe Englishmen, a bunch of black-skinned, thick-lipped, curly-headed wannabe Englishmen is what they think of themselves as in the Caribbean. Well, for the ones who don't think of themselves as Frenchmen or wannabe Spaniards, there's a whole lot of schizophrenia and denial of reality and factionalism among the rest of the black world on the planet. So Pan-Africanism is a non-starter as long as the only people who believe in it are in the United States, while everybody else takes their turns taking shots at us. I respect what Dr. Clarke stood for. I respect what it was that he wanted, and it certainly would be a good idea. But we must be realistic about the fact that Pan-Africanism, that's an idea that would have to be imposed on the black world. It's not something that they're coming to on their own. It's something that they're fighting against. So for those black folks who believe that black people the world over are going to have to unite in the interest of preserving our people, that's going to require that there's going to be a dominant group of black folks with their heads on straight who have the right ideology and the resources required in order to promote that ideology. That's not going to come out of Africa. It's not going to come out of the Caribbean, that's for damn sure. It's not going to come from African expatriates in Europe. It's not going to come from South America. It's going to come right here out of the United States with us. I am a true believer in the ideals and the philosophies espoused and expressed by our beloved Grandmaster Teacher, Dr. John Henrik Clarke. And the best thing that we can do to promote what it is that he spent his life fighting for is to make sure that we have the power to promote it. Dr. Clarke spent his life making sure that he taught his people where it was that we went right and where it was that we went wrong. He demanded above all other things that we see ourselves and our history exactly the way that it happened. And yes, there's been a number of mistakes made along the way, tragic mistakes, near fatal mistakes, but there's also been a lot of right calls made too. And if we would embrace that path, instead of trying to find some way to get around it because we're trying to make sure that we hang on to our very oppressors, we'll be a lot better off when we decide, you know what? We do not need white supremacy and we don't want to be an auxiliary of it. But that begins with understanding where you've been. That's why Dr. John Henrik Clarke chose to be a historian. He made that his calling in life. Napoleon is credited with having said that history is a lie agreed upon. Well, that's obvious when you're talking about European history, but we're not talking about Europeans here. We're talking about black people right here in the United States, and our history is not a lie. We cannot afford for it to be a lie, and we can't afford for the dominant society to foist and saddle us with lies, because what they do is they're going to tell us one falsehood after the next. They'll take the history books, tear out 90% of the pages, redact the other 10%, and then say, here, now you got the whole story. That's good enough for them, but it ain't good enough for us. We have got to do the pick and shovel work, getting sweat on our brow. We got to be the ones coughing up tons of dust in the archives as we're going through the actual source documents. We got to get comfortable with that. The reason that Dr. Clarke spent his life teaching history is because history is a lesson to be learned. It is not meant to be fetishized or otherwise turned into nothing more than a pseudo-academic form of battle rapping. To do that is to miss the point. The main thing about history is, especially the history of black people in this country, is it tells us a lot about the world and our place in it. As a case study, you had that movie, John Adams, that miniseries on HBO, and about the only salient thing that I could find to be taken away from it was about the Boston Massacre. Now, of course, in the United States, as all citizens are taught, the Boston Massacre was, at best, what they'll say is, okay, well, maybe it wasn't the way that engraving showed it, where the British lined up and like a firing squad and executed the people. Okay, maybe it didn't happen like that. But what part that they left out is that there was a trial that followed. Now, the fact that they leave that out, that is important. That's deliberate. Because the entire idea is history under white supremacy is meant to be a justification of everything that white supremacy has done. It is meant to indoctrinate you. That, the way that things are today, this is just the inevitable, indeed the natural result of a series of absolutely unchangeable, irresistible events. It couldn't have turned out any other way, you see. It certainly wasn't because there were people who were fighting to twist the world into this perverted, demonic hellhole that you see today. It was just something it was the hand of God, you see. The Boston Massacre is a good example of the way that it's taught to American school children. They talk about the fact that the engraving wasn't accurate, but they leave it at that. They simply leave it at that. They don't mention that there was a trial afterwards, and they don't mention that it was John Adams himself who represented the British soldiers who had shot dead Crispus Attucks and some other anonymous white people who didn't really do anything. John Adams defended the first act that was supposed to be, as we're taught, the first step on the road to revolution, the first major act of violence credited with kicking off the inevitable march to revolution. But that is what history, or rather his story, is under white supremacy. They leave out the details. You need a justification of the American Revolution. You need an irrefutable justification. So the very fact that you don't tell people what happened after the Boston so-called massacre, that is done so as to make people misbelieve, give them the false impression that nothing happened. These guys, basically, that they had the same thing the white cops do when it comes to black people in the U.S. Oh, those mean old British soldiers, they shot some people dead and just went about their way and nothing was done about it. This is the reason why it's important that we venerate, remember, and that we consume and make a part of ourselves the works of our grandmaster teachers, because you're not learning anything under white supremacy, and yet most of us, we basically let our brains go to sleep at that. Look at the garbage being taught in schools. This aggressive effort to try to rewrite the history of slavery. Well, slavery wasn't all that bad. In fact, slavery was a benign institution. Remember those textbooks in Texas that they were trying to spread around? I think also in Georgia, too. The slaves lived lives of quiet dignity. Well, here's your quiet dignity. And it tells you everything you need to know that there was not a ferocious outcry from all levels when it comes to the so-called white liberals about that. They were looking at it more along the lines of, well, I'm sure that they were just misinformed. I'm sure this was just a clerical error somewhere. Beatings, rapes, murders, children being sold, stripped from the arms of their mothers and sold to the far-flung other hellholes of the South. Yeah, that's your quiet dignity. See, if they're not able to hide the history, if the history can't be hidden, then it's just a matter of just wait a little while. We'll just tell some out-and-out lies about it and make them bold lies, big lies. And the reason why is people tend to be shocked almost to the point of non-responsive when they hear some outrageous lie, because it just becomes too much for them to process that somebody would actually sit there and say, no, the sky isn't blue, it's green with yellow polka dots. Now, when people give you a false memory of the past, what they can also do is control your future, because that's how we orient ourselves in time. We look at where we've been, and that tells us how we got to where we are. There was a movie that came out some years ago called Memento. It was a Guy Pearce movie. It was one of Christopher Nolan's early flicks. And what it was about was a man who had a unique mental disorder where he couldn't remember anything more than a few seconds. So he would have tattoos all over himself. And he was looking for his wife's killer. And he would have tattoos all over himself to help him try to remember certain clues and certain details. And you know, that's what happens to you when you have no memory of the past. You can't remember anything. People can get over on you all the time because you can't remember, or rather, in our case, you refuse to remember. That's why it's so damnable to allow yourself and to allow your children to be indoctrinated with propaganda from the very people who put you in chains in the first place. When you do that, that's a recipe for perpetual enslavement, and that's exactly what we've got. Because not only do we refuse to do just the pig simple work of looking at our own past, our own accomplishments, our own deeds and words for ourselves, we just wait and say, well, it doesn't have any significance unless some white person gives their approbation to it. If a white person acknowledges it, if a white person says this is worthy, then it's worthy. If they don't, well, that means it has no significance. Putting value to the things that we have done, that begins with us. It doesn't begin with everyone else. What kind of messed up mentality makes it where you're asking other people's permission, sitting on your hands, waiting for someone else to give you permission to be proud of what you've done, especially when it's a hell of a lot more valorous than anyone else? This is what Dr. John Henrik Clarke and so many others dedicated their lives to doing, to breaking those mental chains, putting the facts in front of black people. You got black people looking around going, well, do you think some white folks will make a mini-series on TV about it? Better question would be, why do you give a damn if they do? You see, other groups of people, they take responsibility for educating themselves. They take responsibility for educating their children. They don't wait to see if some white publishing company is going to put something in a book that they agree with. They take it upon themselves. We are going to be the ones who listen to one another when it comes to our past and to our present and what it is that we can learn from both. Now, of course, to be sure, it is always dicey whenever we try to make these one-to-one comparisons between ourselves and these non-black groups, even when it comes to black immigrants. It is, of course, impossible to draw a one-to-one comparison like that because, after all, white supremacy is not based on anti-Asian racism. It's not based on anti-Hispanic racism. It's not based on anti-Arab racism or anti-Indian racism. It is based on anti-black racism. So white supremacy is always going to be concerned with trying to find a way to whitewash and otherwise rationalize and downplay its perpetual oppression and mistreatment of black people because we are the ones who white supremacy is based on. So it's not a matter of them trying to figure out how do we say that the Chinese people who were brought in to build the railroads and their little opium dens, they lived lives of quiet dignity. It doesn't matter. They're irrelevant to that. As far as white supremacy is concerned, they could care less about trying to whatever minor acts of inconvenience these other non-black groups claim to have had. White supremacy is not based on that, so it means nothing to them to try to find a way to justify it or downplay it or rewrite it. We are the ones that they always aim their media and propaganda guns at. And the defense to that is to be armed with the truth. And how blessed we are that we have had so many titans, not giants, but titans, like Dr. John Henrik Clarke, who did so much of that work. These titans who brought our people the knowledge. Knowledge, not belief. We spent the last 2 years, 2019 and 2020, arm wrestling with black folks about whether or not it's a good idea to vote for an Asian woman who claims to be black and to vote for an old wrinkled racist white man who has been doing everything that he can to pass every anti-black piece of legislation that he can and to run black folks into the ground every chance he's gotten. And what makes you think that these people are going to be different now, that they're going to do anything different when both of them are elderly at this point? Joe Biden's got one leg in the grave, the other foot dangling, and Kamala Harris is 5 seconds away from retirement age. So what makes you think that these two lifelong anti-black racists are going to do anything different than what they've done for the last 50 years? And what people say, I believe. Children believe in all kinds of things. Your child will believe whatever you tell them. They'll believe in the tooth fairy. They'll believe in a white man, the same white guy who won't give you a job, the same white guy who will not give you a business loan, the same white guy who will call the police on you if they see you walking down the street or if they just see you, period. Oh, but don't worry, though. There's going to be a white guy who's going to come to your house and he's going to throw all sorts of consumer goods around because he likes you like that. Children can be made to believe anything. People will believe anything. They'll believe that the world is flat. People will believe anything. My question is, what do you know? Adults know things. They don't rely on belief. Belief is about treating something as fact, even though you have not confirmed it for yourself. Even if you have no evidence for it, you're going to treat it like a fact regardless. That is a childish mentality. That is a gullible mentality. And that is one that we cannot afford. That is a mental and spiritual delinquency that too many of us have indulged for far too long. If we take responsibility for what we know, as opposed to letting people tell us what to believe, if we took responsibility for that, then we could never have white supremacists or their assorted bootlicks lying to us or manipulating us. See, the lying doesn't stop just with history class in primary school. It continues every day from cradle to the grave. As I've continually taught you, white supremacy subjects black people to a breaking process, but it must subject us and resubject us to that breaking process every single day. It is not an event, it is a process. It happens perpetually, over and over and over and over again. Tomorrow morning, the breaking process must begin anew. You can't just smash someone's psyche once or throw a hand grenade into someone's understanding of the world once and then walk away. No, human psychology is far more resilient than that. These folks might put their psyche and their mind state back together again, so you got to make sure that tomorrow morning, I know there's nothing but fragments of what used to be your mentality, but I got to stomp on those fragments. I got to turn them into nothing more than dust. That's how white supremacy operates. And because of that, you got a whole lot of black folks who have talked themselves into believing all kinds of things that they already know not to be true, but they're believing it because, well, that's what happens when you have a culture that has practiced putting its faith into the hands of its oppressors. We willingly, gleefully take the word of liars, people who we know from experience to be anti-black racists. We place our faith and our fate in the hands of a bunch of white supremacists and people who we know to be their bootlicks. White supremacy has such an easy time selling us on its lies because in too many cases, we have made it very clear that we're looking for a reason or an excuse to deny reality. So here they come along with some of the most unrealistic lies imaginable, and too many of us just lap that stuff up and we think it's okay. Well, it's not okay. It is not okay to sit back and wait to see if your enemy is going to teach you about yourself. The only thing he's going to teach you about yourself is anything, any lie, any obfuscation, any sort of twisted, perverted twisting of the facts that he thinks will make you much more agreeable to his demands for power. Whatever will make you more suitable to serve his interests, that's what he's going to teach you. It won't be real, it won't be true, but hey, if you're going to go for it, there's one born every minute. You cannot think to yourself that the people who put you in chains are going to free you. It doesn't work that way. You have to take responsibility for breaking those chains, starting with the mental chains. But of course, the moment that you do that, you also have to take upon yourself the responsibility to oppose the dominant society. And too many black folks are trying to make peace with massa. Too many black folks, even at this late date, are trying to figure out if they can find a comfortable place under white supremacy. Can you be friends with the oppressor class? Oppressors don't look for friends. They look for victims. Now, if you're going to be a willing victim of white supremacy, well, I guess we all dig our own graves, but you know what? I'm not jumping in that grave with you. And I don't recommend that anybody else do it either. Our problem happens to be that we have devalued our own selves. We put so little credibility in ourselves and other black people, even though we come out of a common experience. We put so little credibility in ourselves and in each other. The rest of the world lies to us. But we're not even willing to hear the truth, even when it's coming from one another. History is important. As Malcolm said, of all the sciences, history is best qualified to reward our research. That's the reason why, starting in 2017, soon as she made it to the Senate, I was all over Kamala Harris's case. And I used her history as a prosecutor in order to point out why it is that we cannot support this person, to make the case against her and point it out. This is exactly what she is, Obama 2.0, a second attempt to try to float another Obama-esque candidate and see if we fall for it. And of course, Jim Crow Joe. Soon as he threw his hair plugs hat in the ring, it was time to make sure black folks understood this is who Joe Biden is. Oh, you got some Negroes today. They're trying to act so surprised. I can't believe that Joe Biden's talking to black folks like dogs. I mean, this man's not even in the White House. I mean, I can't believe it. I thought he was so different. No, you didn't think he was so different. You wanted to deny reality. We told you what the hell he is, and now that he's acting exactly as we told you, as Maya Angelou said, and you love to quote, these black feminists love to quote Maya Angelou, but they don't actually listen. As she said, when people tell you who they are, why don't you believe them? Here's a better question. When black people who have shown you, rock solid black folks, whose dedication to black empowerment is impeccable, when we tell you this is what this bastard is, why don't you believe us? When we present you his words and deeds over the course of 50 years, why did that carry so little weight with a number of black folks? Why was it that you had some black folks who were more interested in hearing what a white liberal like Rachel Maddow says, a woman who makes her daily bread being a cheerleader for one of the major parties? That's who black folks wanted to be hearing from. They want to be hearing from the same CNN and MSNBC who have been making excuses for the murders of black people at the hands of the police, the same CNN and MSNBC who demonize the black victims of white police violence. The same CNN and MSNBC who love to show you the missing white woman of the week, but they never talk about a black woman under any circumstances unless it's some sort of gossip or to trash them. And this is who a lot of black folks wanted to hear instead. They wanted to hear a white media that was only too eager to ignore Joe Biden's track record. Well, we're not going to say anything. He's turned over a new leaf. Oh, Joe Biden has apologized. That's a bald-faced lie. He never apologized. He never apologized at all for what he's done. And truth be told, for the sake of argument, let's go ahead and say that Jim Crow Joe decides that he would pull a Jimmy Swaggart and he would get in front of black folks and start blubbering tears. I'm so sorry if I can't remember what I did, but if I could, I'd be sorry for it. I beg forgiveness. At this late date, would you want to hear this scumbag asking for forgiveness for what he's done? He can never make amends for what he's done. The crimes that he's committed against us, you are not able to absolve yourself of those sins because the damage that he's done, the lives that he's wrecked, the cities that this man destroyed, you cannot undo that. So an apology is worthless and meaningless. But even as a gesture, Jim Crow Joe made it clear, I'm not even going to do that much. So meaningless gesture it would be. He's like, oh, forget about that. I'm not sorry for any of it. What do you mean? It was the cities. You want to be mad at somebody? Be mad at the states. The states did that to you. Be mad at them. And there are black folks who decided, well, as long as I got some white liberals saying it, it must be true. Yeah, because the white media has always portrayed black people in a positive light. Every single lynching that took place, you had the white media justifying it and carrying the white supremacist line and saying, old Negro Bo over here, he raped some white woman and some virtuous white men caught this dastardly Negro and put him to the stake to dissuade any other Negroes from calling them their predictable lawlessness. And that's what the white media has always done. The demonizing of black people who are the victims of white police violence, that's not new. They've always done this. You can go back 150 years. Every time a black person is killed, particularly at the hands of some white supremacist, the white media is always going to carry the white supremacist line. Oh, this white supremacist over here who has a criminal record long as your arm, you won't be hearing about that. This is a guy who was feared and abhorred even by other white people. You won't hear about that. Instead, they'll tell you about his job. They'll tell you that he owned a dog. They'll tell you that he has a grandmother, as if, oh, this makes this, he's just a wholesome guy who got caught up in a tragic confluence of events. That's what they did with Dylan Roof. That's what they did with the Las Vegas shooter. That's what they've done with all of these white supremacists who call themselves killing black people or just killing in general. It's always a matter of, well, he's just an average blue collar guy and nothing to see here. Oh, what a freak incident. Yeah, a whole lot of freak incidents. This is how dangerous it is when you decide that you're going to be learning history from your enemies. Dr. Clarke said that the book that he always planned to write, but he never wrote a single word, The Role of the Bastard as a Factor in World History. Now, when it comes to that term, the bastards of history, sure, you've got genetic bastards. And of course, when it comes to various groups who the Europeans have basically created, mulattoes, Eurasians, etc. Yes, of course, you can point to that. That's the most blatant and obvious example of the role of the bastard as a factor in world history, sure. But you also have political and social bastards too. Be it Clarence Thomas, or Negro Jim Clyburn, or Simone Mammy Sanders, or Don Lemonade, or any of the rest of these fakers, frauds, phonies, fools, sellouts, suck-ups, and simps. There's a number of bastards who white supremacy has created. These clowns, these political, social, and ideological bastards. Oh, you see a lot of them. They go by a lot of different names. Black conservative. What the hell is that? As Dr. John Henrik Clarke put it, what the hell are you trying to conserve? Black feminists. Yeah, because a black woman's issues in this country are related to the fact that she's a woman, not to the fact that she's black. See, if Tatiana Jefferson had been a black man, they would never have gunned her down in her own home. If Rekia Boyd had been a black man, she would never have been killed. If Ayanna Jones had been a 7-year-old black boy, especially a black boy in a park, the police would never have gunned her down. If Sandra Bland had been a black man, then those cops would never have pulled her over, much less have killed her. You see how silly that gets? And you also got other groups like these so-called men's rights activists. Let me tell you something. If you're a black man and you're running around talking that nonsense, you don't know what the hell you don't know up from down. Because none of your men's rights activists said a damn word about Philando Castile being murdered. None of your men's rights activists said a single word in support of Bill Cosby. They were after freaking Bill Cosby before they were after Harvey Weinstein. No politician has run on a platform of, I'm going to put some white man in prison. But that prosecutor, that Steele guy up there in Pennsylvania, he ran on a platform of, I'm going to get Bill Cosby. Now, that alone should have made it where he couldn't bring an indictment, because when you sit here, any judge who even has a law degree knows that that is so horrifyingly prejudicial. You can't allow this guy to carry out a prosecution. Why, he ran for public office on this idea of, I'm going to put this guy in jail. That's the same thing that's happening with those two lawyers in Missouri who the geriatric alt-right Ken and Barbie, as they're called. The DA in that case, the judge is telling her that the DA is not going to be allowed to prosecute the case because, well, she politicized it, they said. Well, she made it as part of her voter outreach. Okay, so a white prosecutor does it against Bill Cosby, and it's all well in the. A black prosecutor is alleged to have done it, and truth be told, there was a hell of a stretch for them to get there. And they say, well, you can't prosecute this case. Oh yeah, there's a whole lot of black folks who have chosen to be in some form or another the bastards as a force in world history. We got these black sororities and fraternities, the Boulé, the Lynx, the whatevers. You got these black folks calling themselves all sorts of nonsense. They're trying to imitate bastard versions of these white organizations. We can't be feminists, so we'll be black feminists. Well, we can't be men's rights activists, so we'll try to be black men's rights activists or what have you. Yeah, because your biggest problem in life is that you're male. It's not that you're black. Black has nothing to do with it. And the reason that white supremacy relies upon bastard groups is because this is how you confuse and derange and otherwise disrupt the internal politics of the oppressed. You send these individuals of their own group who now have a bastardized mindset, if not more than that that's been bastardized, and they'll go among the very group that they're part of and start saying, no, it's not about white supremacy, it's about the patriarchy. No, it's not about white supremacy, it's that men can't get a fair shake in this country. No, it's not about white supremacy. It's all about class. It's a class struggle, you see. Now I hope you're starting to understand why Dr. John Henrik Clarke walked away from socialism. Oh, he might have stuck his head in the door to see what these white folks were talking about with socialism, but he soon looked and said, no, they ain't saying nothing intelligent. This ain't about class. Family, Dr. Clarke taught us that we stand at the crossroads now. A lot of us have decided that we're going to stay on the same old path because, if you keep doing the same thing over and over again, sooner or later you're going to get a different result, right? I mean, that's just to be expected. But there are a number of us who actually could be bothered to look at our history. There's a number of us who actually could be bothered to listen to our grandmaster teachers, and we understand, no, we're at a fork in the road, and we understand where we went wrong, and this time we're going to be making the right choice. Black empowerment. We have no friends. Dr. John Henrik Clarke gave us that phrase, and it's as true now as it was. In fact, it's more true now than it's ever been. Oh, no, we're not trying to come up with any sort of coalitions. We tried that, and it was a fool's errand, but I guess it was just something we had to go through to prove to ourselves that fat meat really is greasy, some of us denying that too. No, as far as we're concerned, we got something better than friends. We've got family. As Dr. Clarke said, learn to look in the mirror and see a friend. White supremacy indoctrinated us with a lot of things, but the one thing that it did to us that was the most damning of all was it discounted the value of black people in the eyes of other black people. White supremacy successfully grafted onto most of us an anti-black mentality that manifests itself in so many ways. We'll sit here and see a white supremacist with a 50-year track record of racism, and instead of us trying to destabilize the system, instead you'll have black people making excuses for why we need to go along with it and prop it up a little bit longer. Well, those of us who understand where it's at and what it's got to be, as Dr. Clarke said, we're not going along with that garbage. We represent a complete and thorough break with the failures of the past, people who have actually learned from history, history taught to us by black people who actually give a rip about us. We're not trying to figure out how do we reform the lies that have been agreed upon by the Europeans. No, we are embracing the truth as told to us by our grandmaster teachers. And that's the reason why I say that these days, as far as I'm concerned, these are holidays. I don't need the white supremacists to tell me that January 1st is a holiday. It's a holiday because it's the date that my personal favorite grandmaster teacher was born. Dr. Joseph Ben Yachanan talked about that. He said, you don't need to be asking for a holiday. You take a day. The Hispanics didn't ask whether or not Cinco de Mayo was okay with these good white folks. They said, we taking this day. We will take a siesta. Don't y'all take a siesta every day? Yes, but this will be a longer siesta. That's what they do. That's called exercising power. But then again, they did not have white supremacy engage in a 500-year relentless campaign to try to downgrade and devalue the worth and the image of Latinos and being Hispanic and being from South. They didn't do that. They did that with us. A relentless jihad that the Hispanics have taken part in. All you got to do is take a look at the racist caricatures in Mexico, and that's just the tip of a very large, very ugly iceberg of south of the border racism, which permeates all of Latin America, by the way. So, family, I'm going to close out this John Henrik Clarke Memorial Day lecture and to remind us all that as fine as the works of Dr. Clarke were, they're not complete. And the reason why is Dr. Clarke was writing the first few chapters of our Resurrection and Rise. Thank you, Dr. Khalid Muhammad. But the chapter in which we ultimately topple white supremacy and relegate it to the graveyard of the past, that chapter has not been written yet, and that is for us to write. Dr. Clarke began the effort. It falls to us to continue it. It is our right, our duty, and our glory to do so. I've often said that if an accurate history of black people in this country is ever written thus and so, well, thanks to Dr. John Henrik Clarke and so many others, we do have that accurate history. But it is a history who only the first few chapters have been written. There's so much more to write, and we are writing those pages right now. We owe a debt of gratitude to Dr. John Henrik Clarke, to all of our grandmaster teachers. We owe them a debt that we can never repay, but just because we can't repay it does not mean that we have no obligation to try. And the best way that we can honor our grandmaster teachers is to go and do likewise.